Okay. So first off, can you explain who you are? And so like where did you grow up? Were you in school? Did you go to grad school? And can you explain this to our followers and how you're involved with Sawfish?
Yeah, I kind of always from a young age was really interested in aquarium biology, marine science. I grew up in a home where my dad loved the water, my mom loved animals, and so like the combo of that was we spent a lot of time at beaches and lakes and things like that. I grew up in the Chicago area, and so I was really fortunate to have access to the Shed Aquarium growing up. So that was also a big inspiration for me. Spent a lot of birthdays, special events at the Shed. And that was a big inspiration for me. So, fast forward when I was looking at colleges, I was kind of looking for something that, would allow me to kind of go down that route. I had spent a little bit of time volunteering at the Shed Aquarium as well. And I think I was from the get pretty specifically interested in aquarium biology and more of like a zoo and aquarium approach versus being out like doing field research. And again, I think that's because of that early exposure in my home and in my community to aquariums. But yeah, so when I was looking for a school, I actually, my other big love in life is horses. So I was looking for a school that offered some equestrian opportunities along with a really strong zoology program or maybe fisheries biology, something in that vein, and narrowed it down to Colorado State University. Which is kind of funny. A lot of people give me a little side eye when I tell them I went to school at Colorado State, that I went for, like a marine science
Yeah.
type situation in a landlocked state. But a couple reasons that panned out really well for me. So at the time, and I believe still this stands, that Colorado State, it has an excellent veterinary program for one. And, doing a major in zoology, a lot of your coursework overlaps with the same coursework as like the pre-vet students. So they have a really good program for veterinary science, so just animal biology in general. And because Colorado is such a natural resources rich environment, and that's such a big part of their economy out there, they actually also have a lot of great coursework on like fisheries biology, fish physiology, things like that, focused obviously more on their more native species like salmonids and cyprinids, things like that. But definitely the building blocks were there to get a really good education undergrad in animal biology, animal science. So I got a bachelor's with a major in zoology at Colorado State University. And then while I was there, I had been doing some volunteering down at the Denver Aquarium to both get some credit and just continue to get experience. And the Denver Aquarium actually houses three green sawfish. Um, so that's where I got some exposure to sawfish. And actually, calling back to when I got involved at Shed Aquarium, they also housed a green sawfish. So actually, very early on, before I even had my degree and was working full time in the aquarium field, I was getting some really unique opportunities to be around those animals, which is, something that I think about frequently. Very kind of cheesy, but the more I learn about these animals and just how in danger they are and how rare they are, to think about the number of hours that I've spent looking them in the eye, interacting with them in real life, it's just such a privilege and such a treat. And I think that's really kind of that's where my fascination has stemmed from with them and why I continue to pursue opportunities to be more and more involved with these particular animals. Large elasmobranchs were always a big focus. I was one of those kids that like loved Shark Week and all that. So large elasmobranchs were already kind of in my blood. And then as I started getting exposed to sawfish more and more, I just became more and more fascinated with them. And then obviously I ended up landing and doing a large part of my career with SeaWorld in Orlando, and they house two small-tooth sawfish, which again, that continued to be a platform for me and a motivation to learn more about these animals, become more involved with conservation and messaging and teaching people about them. And it's really neat when you are kind of in aquarium biology. It's this weird interface with the world of, like, a lot of people come to aquariums that know surprisingly little about animals, especially something as rare as a sawfish. And I can tell you countless times throughout the years where I've been standing in front of one of our aquariums housing sawfish, and someone from the general public comes up and stands next to me and goes, "Oh my God, I didn't think those were real animals. I thought that was made up. I thought, that was like a cartoon thing." Like, people, yeah, people that have like never seen a sawfish in real life and thought they were like made up animals. I mean, I've heard that multiple times throughout my career. So, and again, all those things just really propped them up and made them so much more interesting and fascinating to me, and made it obvious that there really is like not a lot of representation for them to the general public. Those of us that are really geeky about it and into the science of it, and either do field research or do aquarium biology, I think some of the things we take for granted that we think everyone just kind of accepts and understands.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's not always the case. And that's a really fun part of doing the aquarium side of it too, is when you have these ambassador animals that are in this setting that makes them super accessible to the average person that may, otherwise never ever see these animals in the flesh. That's something that over the years has also just driven me to continue in this career and really enjoy it. And that's part of, it can be a controversial situation at times. There's a lot of people that have a lot of strong feelings about if zoos and aquariums should exist. And it's interactions like that to me that reinforce that, I'm doing the right thing with my time and my career. That makes it rewarding for me. But yeah, all of that kind of built up to at this point, I've actually recently started a new position at the Georgia Aquarium, who houses green sawfish. They have a male and female pair there. And I've also recently officially joined Sawfish Conservation Society as the co-chair of education, which I'm really excited about because, as I just spoke on, getting the word out about these animals, and getting your average lay person who maybe doesn't have like the strongest connection to the ocean or the most exposure to the ocean, getting them to kind of understand uh these animals and the challenges they face, and that this is an animal that is fascinating, charismatic, looks right out of science fiction, and yet trying to explain to people that it's an animal we could see extinct in a few generations. I think all of that, is drives me to be involved with Sawfish Conservation Society, and, continue to pursue the career that I do. And yeah, and just be really passionate about
And so
messaging.
are you, I guess you kind of explained a little bit about how you got involved with Sawfish, but are you now part of the Sawfish, like, because they have a husbandry team usually at aquariums, right? So
They do.
were you on the team at SeaWorld, and then now you're on the Sawfish team at Georgia Aquarium, or?
So I was on at SeaWorld. I was very heavily involved in the aquarium world. Usually, we are assigned to write different husbandry teams or different animals specifically. And I spent a large part, probably 8 or 9 years of my time at SeaWorld, as the primary or kind of the point person directly responsible for our large shark tank, which included our sawfish. So I was definitely very heavily involved there. With the Georgia Aquarium, it's a newer transition, and I actually am not directly involved on this sawfish husbandry team as of this moment. I have been helping them out a little, always available for advice on what my experiences have been. But right now, there are actually some other folks that are more directly responsible for the sawfish at this time. But I actually really love that because we need more people that, are knowledgeable and educated about these animals and can, be the next generation of the aquarium biologists and advocates for these animals that learn to love them and learn about them. So I am, I've been doing this for about 20 years so far. I have no plans in changing avenues anytime soon.
Mhm.
But yeah, as of right now, when I came in, there was an established team that is caring for the sawfish right now. Like I said, I love having chats with them and sharing experiences. But right now, there is like the next generation of aquarists that are working with those guys. And just based on kind of how the teams are structured and stuff at the aquarium, there is a possibility at some point I may be rotated into a more active role with the sawfish there. But as of right now, I'm kind of just getting established at the aquarium in my new role, getting to know people, getting to know operations, things like that. So at the moment, I am kind of on the periphery of that, but definitely always kind of poking around a little bit, seeing
Yeah.
what's going on over there. But yeah, I mean, I like I said, I appreciate that there is another generation coming up
Mhm.
behind me that also, needs that experience and that exposure. And so I love, having long chats with them. But as of right now, I don't have direct hands on every day with the sawfish. But yeah, and in lieu of that, I am doing the Sawfish Conservation Society stuff
Right.
too, and we'll probably be spending a lot more time this year doing some outreach
Yeah.
um, events and stuff through the society. So yeah, I'll be getting my sawfish fixed that way.
Okay. And you're talking about training like the younger generations, the new generations coming in and working with sawfish. Can you talk about working with sawfish in aquariums? Because I've talked to people just like, when I visit and they tell me they're super smart and they like learn all the targets for the other species. Like, is that true? Like, how was it working? And is there a difference? Because you've now worked with greens and smalltooth. Is there a difference between the two species as well?
Yeah, so I mean I've definitely had the bulk of my experience with the small tooth for
Mhm.
sure. And they were absolutely smart animals. We had so at SeaWorld our sawfish were actually trained or conditioned to come into our medical pool. So we have for folks that maybe aren't super familiar with how a lot of aquariums are set up. A lot of times there is a pool when you have very large animal habitats that are mixed species. A lot of times you will have an adjacent pool or holding space that can be separated from the rest of the population for a variety of reasons. If you are introducing animals, if an animal maybe needs to see the vet or we need to handle an animal, that puts them in a much smaller space, makes it much more manageable. But sawfish being benthic feeders, our shark habitat at SeaWorld was 15 feet deep and about 750,000 gallons and full of aggressive predators, both elasmobranchs and teleosts. We've got large jacks and drums and things like that in there, along with other large sharks. So getting food to the bottom of that habitat is a challenge. So our solution was we trained the sawfish to come into the adjacent medical pool voluntarily so that we could isolate them and then they can feed off the bottom at their will and not have to worry about competition or aggression or issues of getting food onto the bottom for them. So yeah, ours were trained for that specific behavior, which they did successfully repeatedly all the time. They seem to have very clear understanding of what that program meant.
Uh-huh.
But they were also they could be real pests at other spots too. Our male sawfish in particular. In the last couple of years that I was at SeaWorld, we actually also obtained a couple of great hammerheads. So we had those mocherons, and those are not small or shy animals. Like they're pretty large, bold sharks. works. And our male sawfish was unfazed by them. He thought he should always check out their feeding station. Um, and they were kind of notorious for dropping food as well. So he seemed to learn that program pretty quickly, that that was an opportune place to be. And yeah, and managed to do it without, getting injured or, having negative interactions with the hammerheads.
Jeez.
So yeah, certainly they can absolutely learn, and they can absolutely recognize patterns or recognize, a program that you've kind of set out for them. They can learn to understand like this particular set of, stimuli can mean food.
Mhm.
Um, and same thing for the green sawfish as well. All the aquariums I worked out with green sawfish, the green sawfish have stations where they learn to associate their feeding opportunities. Some of them, they come up the wall to the surface of the aquarium. Some of them had stations down in the lower parts of the aquarium where maybe they would be offered food by divers. But yeah, they absolutely can learn and pretty quickly, where especially if food is
Yeah.
involved.
And with the divers, they would do it with the divers because I know some people get scared and think like, oh, sawfish are gonna, they have a giant
Yeah,
claw, it would cut you. But like with the divers are there, they would just, swim by and grab the food or like how would that?
yeah. So it was the Denver Aquarium in particular that they fed them during some of the maintenance diving schedule. And they did have very long tongs
Mhm.
because they were a little scared of, right, that kind of
Yeah.
knee-jerk reaction that they have. Because it is my opinion, after spending many, many years feeding sawfish, that inclination of theirs to swing their rostrum during feeding opportunities, it almost seems to me like a knee-jerk reaction. Like I almost think they don't have complete control over it. I think it's a switch in their brain of like, this is a feeding opportunity, and they'll swing
Yeah.
that rostrum pretty aggressively. So there was a lot of protocol involved and a lot of training, like not just anybody could do it. And there
Mhm.
was equipment involved to try to keep people safe, because yeah, I do believe that it's not necessarily an aggression thing as much as just like something that fires in their brain that says food and they swing.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know like that's one thing when we talk to people in the public, they're all like, oh, they're probably really aggressive and, try and hit people with the saw. Or if you see them in the wild, they'll do that. But, clearly that's not what's happening. It's more like you're saying, just a knee-jerk kind of reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it was interesting, if there was not food in the water, we could be in some pretty close contact situations at times. And I've never seen a sawfish use their rostrum defensively towards me. And again, this is a very limited experience in a
Mhm.
very specific setting. But we would usually do like an annual physical on our sawfish, which meant catching them and handling them. And there were times when we'd be diving around them, and if there wasn't food in the water, we'd get quite close. We actually had our female sawfish at SeaWorld enjoyed tactile from our divers, so would allow us to like scratch on her with our fingertips, and she would kind of react with like a little flap of like her pec and pelvic fins, but stay quite still, never moved her rostrum, never swung at us. And again, even when we were catching these animals, which was not always something that they were like keen to participate in, I've never had a sawfish kind of swing at me in those settings. So my exposure, at least my very limited, experience with these like, 6 or 7 animals, is that I've never seen it used in defense against people.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
so yeah, I have found them to be pretty gentle giants as far as people
okay.
go. They're not, like many other like big rays,
Mhm.
people are so worried about being stung by rays, and it's like, no, you explain to people that don't understand or don't have the exposure, or have only heard stories about people being stung, and you explain, no, it's a defense. Like, you really have to make them feel threatened to get that kind of reaction. So like many other, I would say, other large rays, they're really quite mellow most of the time, as long as they don't feel threatened. and there's
Okay.
not food involved.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. I've heard that before from other people that like they've seemed very gentle and like calm. Which again, obviously if people are catching them in the wild, they don't seem super calm because they're on a line. But that's nice to hear like naturally, just if they're kind of in a chill space and they're not getting caught by a fishing line, they're very gentle, which is
Yeah.
nice to hear. Um, well, one of the big reasons we also wanted to talk to you is because you were at the Sawfish birth that happened at SeaWorld. So can you talk a little bit about that and like how many were born? Like, were you planning it? Was this something you guys had tried to do, or was this kind of a surprise? Or like, and what do you think made it successful? Because it's only the second one, right? That's happened.
Yeah, yeah. So it was definitely a huge surprise. It was one of those surprises you hope for. It's like
Uh-huh.
playing the lottery, right? Like you buy the ticket, but you
Hmm.
don't know if you'll ever actually win anything. So we had these two small two sawfish for
Hmm.
a long time, with no observable kind of significant activity.
Hmm.
The male sawfish we had had since '89.
Oh my
He had,
goodness.
yeah, he had been bycatch
Hmm.
off from a shrimp trawler off of Venice Beach in Florida, or at least that's what his records say. So a really interesting thing about this is it really spans multiple generations and kind of a renaissance in zoo and aquarium keeping, as far as so many of our records and stuff now are electronic, and we have pit
Hmm.
tags, and we have all this stuff that helps us keep records now. And when these animals came into SeaWorld's collection, a lot of that wasn't the standard. It was a lot of just paper trail.
Hmm.
And, we all know that paper is, it can be tough to keep track of,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's easily destroyed. Um, but so the male sawfish, as I said, his records indicate that he came in '89 as bycatch. The female, when I left SeaWorld, we were still really trying to piece together her story. There have been a few different sawfish in the care of SeaWorld over the years. She arrived at the Orlando park in '93.
Okay.
But we have a pretty solid paper trail that says she lived at all three of the existing SeaWorld parks. So she spent time in San Diego, San Antonio, and Orlando. So she was a very well-traveled lady, very resilient. And we think she was actually originally probably collected in the Keys in the '80s. SeaWorld
Okay.
used to have a facility down there called SeaWorld Shark Research Institute. That is long gone. It changed hands a few times, but they did have a research facility down in the Keys. And there are some gaps, so we can't draw a straight line, but we think we found a record that indicates that she was probably originally collected there, bounced around the parks, landed in Orlando in '93.
Okay.
So she may have been in the care of the parks as early as like the early '80s.
Wow.
So she had been around for a while.
Hmm.
um, but anyway, so those two animals resided in the park together for a long time, since the early '90s. And starting probably maybe like around 2010, 2015, somewhere in that range. We started making a lot of really aggressive updates to the care of those sawfish in SeaWorld shark habitat. And it wasn't just the sawfish, it was the habitat as a whole. Again, that is, it's a industry that has changed a lot in the last 20 years in a great way. The way we look at welfare and stuff, especially of fish. It really used to be the attitude for a long time of fish of like, okay, if they don't do great, they pass away, like we just go get another one. We just go take another one from the ocean. And that is really responsible zoos and aquariums have gotten way away from that. And not only have they gotten away from that, away from this idea of just kind of sustaining best we can and then replacing as needed. Like now we think really hard about those animals actually thriving
Wow.
in human care, not just making it.
Mhm.
There are a lot more veterinarians and stuff now that concentrate on like internal fish medicine. And, we also have like field researchers that are learning so much more about their physiology through their tagging studies and where they're spending their time. But yeah, bringing all that science together to try to help us give these animals lives where they're not just surviving, but they're thriving. Um, and so, that was a big concentration for us there, for all the sharks and rays, all the fish, all the animals. But yeah, so we had been making updates. The Shark Tank at SeaWorld Orlando had opened in, I think, 81 or 82. So it had been around for a while, which is great, but obviously that dated infrastructure and setup needed some updating. So there had been a number of things over the previous like 5 to 7 years that we had concentrated really hard on updating. So there had been things that helped us bring the water chemistry more closely to where it should be. Some things with the lighting. We got much better lighting. We had been using like an older, just like incandescent stage lighting, like you would on like a stage show for a play. But we got some LEDs that more accurately kind of replicate the right spectrums. And the lights that we could control better as far as a ramp up and a ramp down and variety and that kind of respect. So there had been a number of things that we had worked really hard on. And even despite all that, we knew our sawfish had been around for a minute. So kind of the consensus was we thought they might be post-reproductive. They might be geriatric
Oh,
animals.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, we know so little about
Right.
them. Like nobody could say for sure
Mhm.
exactly if that was true or not. But we did know that, these animals were probably minimally in their 30s.
Mhm.
And we, had not ever really seen any kind of behavior that made us think that there might be like reproductive behaviors going on. Obviously most elasmobranchs have pretty violent breeding behaviors that
Mhm.
involve a lot of biting and scratching. And but the first time we saw any kind of evidence of that was actually during the COVID shutdown. So when the park closed for the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously the traffic was way reduced in the park. It got a lot darker and a lot quieter in the park. We had reduced some lighting schedules for both for energy savings and just because for practicality, normally when the park is open, there might be lights on the Shark Tank until 10 at night because that's when the park is open till. And I mean, there's varying degrees of light. It would be dimmer in the evenings, but it would be on. And when we were closed for the pandemic, we started shutting all the lights off at, like 4.
Mhm.
And that was actually the first time we came in one day and they were both just beat up. They had clearly had some kind of significant interaction with each other. Again, nobody saw it. It was in the dark, so no cameras saw it.
Oh,
But we
dang.
came in. Yeah, we came in. They were all scratched up. You could just tell they had been smacking each other around with their rostrums. They both had broken teeth all over their rostrum.
Oh.
Um, so they had some kind of significant interaction. And we think that was probably in large part to do with the reduced lighting schedule and just how quiet it got in the parks. But even then, that was in 2020. So our birth in 23, we still to this day don't really understand because we never saw evidence like that again. The parks opened back up. We continue to make improvements, and that did include mitigating noise and sound pollution during dark hours, things like that. Um, and we did start that enrichment program that I told you about with the female sawfish, getting the tactile enrichment that she seemed to respond very strongly to. But yeah, just all these things to try to make their lives better. But yeah, so actually what had happened was the female sawfish had had some skin issues. She was having a little bit of like a bacterial infection or something.
Mhm.
Just these odd spots on her just outer layer of skin, and we tried to give her some oral antibiotics, and she was getting really good at not taking them, just like trying to give them to your dog or
Yeah.
cat. She was spitting the pills out and stuff. So we thought, okay, we're gonna catch her up because we're not seeing an improvement. and give her an injection of antibiotics for this issue that she's having. And while we had her caught up, it is a big production to catch a 12-foot sawfish. It takes a lot of people, a lot of labor. Um, and our veterinary team is also present for that. So we did the things that we had caught her for. They biopsied her, these weird spots, and we got to wait on her to make sure she got the proper amount of meds, things like that. And
Mhm.
then, as a kind of afterthought, right before we were going to release her back into the habitat, the vets said, "Hey, this is a really rare opportunity. We don't get hands on her that much. Can we do an ultrasound?"
Oh,
And that's pretty common for all of our large elasmobranchs, both male and female, that when we have hands on them, if we get the opportunity, we run an ultrasound over them. It can tell us a lot, especially, liver for elasmobranchs is huge. So being able to see the condition of their liver is huge. It lets us get a good heart rate, things like that. So it's not always just a female thing. It's anytime kind of the opportunity presents itself. And the funny thing is, we were a little wishy-washy about it because, again, we worry about stressing these animals
right.
unnecessarily. And she had already been in the stretcher and being held, still for probably like 12 minutes at this point. And that's kind of our cap, is like, we don't ever really want to go past like 15 max. And we really try to keep it more like 10 minutes. The sawfish tolerate it a little bit better because they are
Right.
benthic animals. But we kind of were like, really, guys? And they're like, please, So the veterinarian ran the ultrasound over her, and she got, kind of to the middle of her body, and she looked at me and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I can see what she ate today," And I was like, "Oh, interesting." She said, "What did she eat?" I said, "She had salmon steaks." And she was like, "Oh, that's not what I'm seeing." She's like, "This is a body of something." And I was like,
Oh,
"Oh, well, that's not." And then, like, and this happens very fast. It takes a minute to explain it, but this exchange happens in like 10 seconds where she's like, "No, this is a body." And I was like, "Oh." And she says, "Oh, no, there's fleshy fins. This is an elasmo." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And me, my manager, my supervisor, the vets, all these people with all this experience are sitting there. And we all go, "Oh, one of the sandbars must have pupped and she ate a pup."
yeah.
Like, we do not think this is possible that it could be sawfish pups. We are coming up with like every other explanation. And then she goes, "Oh my God, it's moving."
Oh,
So and even the vet was like, "Okay, whoa, 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 hang on, I'm going to start over." So she goes back to the front of the animal. She's like, "Okay, heart." She's like, "Okay, liver, spiral valve." She's like, no, yeah. She's like, there's pups in here. Like, yeah, I mean, tears in our eyes. Like, we had just no idea, clueless. We really, had no indication that that's what we were going to find that day. We actually thought we were a little worried that she was sick.
mhm.
um but yeah, and that was on May 31st in 2023. That obviously became a very big deal and a big scramble, because then it's like, okay, well, now what are we gonna do?
Right. When is she giving birth? What's
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, she's in a habitat with great hammerheads, sand
Oh,
tigers, sandbar. I mean,
oh,
right. If she gives birth in this Goliath groupers, like if she gives birth in this
oh,
habitat, those pups are toast. Like,
right.
there's no way. And we did actually later think, I wonder if she's given birth before and we didn't know, because maybe it happened at night and there had been
Yeah.
predation and we didn't know. Because we did wonder, after the evidence in 2020
Hmm.
that we saw of breeding, we thought, oh, well, maybe she had a litter between now and then, or maybe she stored sperm from that point. If she did, like, then what was the trigger to fertilize? It was more questions than answers, We were
Right.
thrilled, but it was like, suddenly we're in, like, happy crisis mode. um, but so we spent about a month talking about what to do, and we decided we were going to try to relocate her, which is no small thing. Again, you have
Oh.
this 12-foot critically endangered animal. And at the time, and I believe this still stands, as far as in the US, SeaWorld Orlando is the only place that houses small-tooth sawfish currently. There have been some aquariums in the past, like Ripley's has had them. I think
Mhm.
Georgia's had them. But as it stands for the last several years, the only three aquariums I know of that house small-tooth sawfish are Orlando, the Bahamas, Atlantis, who also had their birth event there. And then I believe there's an aquarium in Mexico that houses, I think, a male, if I'm not mistaken. But for several years now, SeaWorld Orlando is the only place in the U.S. that you can view small tooth sawfish. Um, but yeah, so now we have this large, critically endangered geriatric female who's experiencing another health issue who's
Right.
pregnant. It was definitely the challenge of a lifetime. And very fortunately, we have a lot of experience at SeaWorld Orlando. You know, the park's been around a long time, so we have a number of people on staff that have been there a long time. And all reputable zoos and aquariums kind of work within a network with each other that, you know, we all know each other. We actually talked to Georgia Aquarium a fair amount because they had done some transporting of some different Pristis species. So we wanted to talk to them about if they had sedated their sawfish for moves and things like that. So we did a bunch of research, had a lot of conversations about logistics, did a bunch of rehearsals, got all the equipment together. All the stretchers and stuff that would be needed, and did these dry run throughs, and decided that we thought we could do it. We could do it safely. We could do it with the animal's best interest. We did end up using some sedation to help keep her comfortable and to keep her from struggling. Obviously, we were also very scared about putting that kind of stress on a gravid female because we
Yes.
could, yeah, cause her to potentially miscarry.
Hmm.
Um, so there were, and we didn't know how the weight of having her out of the water momentarily would affect the pups. You know, she's a big animal, well over 300 pounds. So we weren't sure about the weight. So some of those things we did kind of have to roll the dice on and just try to minimize those kind of risks. But like I said, we spent a ton of time rehearsing, a ton of time talking to colleagues, and the move was successful. She made the move great, woke up from anesthesia, no problem. And during that move, we actually got another opportunity to get some more in-depth ultrasound, some better ultrasound images. What we ended up seeing was that we got a really good view of at least one pup's rostrum, and we're able to get some accurate measurements of the rostrum. And the rostrum was about 18 centimeters. And you'll have to forgive me, I should have reviewed this, but based on some of the stuff that we've seen in the field, because we've had a couple events now at this point. Well, Atlantis and the Bahamas had their birth of small-tooth sawfish. But I believe there's been two different events now where small-tooth sawfish has given birth on the line. Well, researchers are present and they've been able to
Yes.
measure the pups.
Hmm.
Yep. So we were able to look at that information and look at size and measurements of those pups.
Hmm.
And we suddenly realized we were way closer than we thought to probably
Oh.
birthing time, because this is a really fun kind of connect here between field researchers and aquarium biologists, is that we were able to look at the field researchers information that said, well, this is the measurements we got on these pups when they were born, and we could look at our ultrasound and say, okay, this pup's rostrum is this long. And we were like, oh, shoot, they're due any day. They're
Hmm.
ready. Like, this is the size they are when they're born. And it was pretty crazy. We moved her on a Thursday, and she pupped on Tuesday, not even a week
Oh my
later.
goodness.
Yeah. And it was funny because that information of comparing the rostrum length to kind of some field researcher notes and stuff, it took a day or two to process that information. And because we moved her on a Thursday, we didn't really learn the significance of that information till Saturday. And so there was already talks of like, oh, we need to set up like 24-hour watches and things like that.
Mhm.
We're much closer than we think we are. But because the way our schedule works in the aquarium, not everybody's in on Monday. A lot of people are off on Monday. Tuesday is kind of our Monday. But we came in Tuesday morning and she had pupped overnight. So before we could even like get our act together,
Gosh.
But because she was in a pool where she had been isolated, the pups were in great shape. There were three of them. There were two females and a male. Yeah. And everyone was in pretty decent shape. They did have a couple scrapes. It does look like mom might have had that knee-jerk reaction of like, hey, there's something small swimming past my rostrum,
Dude.
so I'm gonna swing at it. So they did have some superficial wounds that we did give them some antibiotics for and at their first checkups. But to this day, all three pups survived and are thriving and continue to grow in the backup areas of SeaWorld
Okay.
Orlando. Because it was such a surprise, sadly, they're not on display yet. But because they're such, valuable, critical animals, we don't want to take any chances. So, right, the habitats that are on the public side of the park, none of them were well suited at the time and still aren't for the display of the young sawfish. I mean, now they're significantly larger. Now they're over 4 feet long.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
they
fast.
yeah. So, I mean, most things in human care obviously grow much faster because, like, there's usually not a limiting factor as far as nutrition. Like,
Hmm.
they're kind of given, as much nutrition as they like.
Hmm.
But yeah, they were born right around 2 feet and 2 pounds. And then when I left, right around their first birthday, they were all around 4 feet and 15 pounds. So they grew very, very fast. But yeah, they did great. And actually, one of the individuals she did have some odd developmental things where, yeah, so she almost has it. I am not a veterinarian, so like I sometimes struggle for the most, scientific and proper words to describe some of these things. But where her one pectoral fin should kind of connect to the rest of her body, there is a significant indentation
Hmm.
where that tissue didn't quite fully connect. So she has what I called a cleft fin. I apologize if that is offensive in any way or not like the way you would describe that, but she does. She has like a deep indentation where her pec fin would normally kind of attach just behind like her gill slits.
Hmm.
She's got quite a bit of tissue missing there. And she was kind of slower developmentally, like her rostral teeth. The two more typical pups, we were able to start seeing their rostral teeth probably within about 5 days that sheath had kind of pulled back and
Hmm.
sloughed away and we could really see their teeth. And she took almost 2 weeks before we could really see her
Oh.
rostral teeth. And so she's been interesting for them as well. It's harder for me to speak to her long-term care. Again, I'm not there anymore.
Hmm.
But I know that there's been quite a bit of imaging and stuff done on her. But yeah, so she was a little bit different, but has continued to thrive and survive just the same as the others. But also, what an interesting thing to kind of have something comparatively anatomy wise of like,
Yeah.
different structures and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely like the highlight of my career. Um, and man, I hope it becomes a norm in, aquarium settings that we can get more sawfish having successful breeding events. Just with everything they're up against out in nature, it can only be good news if we can get more reproductive events in all species of sawfish for sure.
Yeah. That goes into my next question. Like, how do you think this can help like their conservation, especially small tooth, now that the spinning sawfish issue is happening again? Like, like is the goal to be able to breed these and then like what do the aquariums typically intend to do? Or are they working with, conservation groups? Are they working with researchers to see which ones? Because you guys keep track of which ones to breed as well, right?
We do. So really interesting and challenging. So sawfish in particular, like there are a lot of programs in zoos and aquariums. We call them species survival plans or SSPs. And yeah, and that's exactly as you described. A lot of times when you have especially critically endangered or threatened species, they're managed very carefully from a breeding standpoint in accredited zoos and aquariums. And animals are definitely put together for breeding opportunities based on genetics and things like that. So the challenge with actually all sawfish, but especially small-tooth sawfish, is we have so few that it's hard to even have those programs available.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier about the small-tooth sawfish, at this point we're down to we only have 3 facilities in the world that I'm currently aware of that hold small-tooth sawfish.
I didn't know that.
Um,
I thought that was only in like the like Western Hemisphere. Like, you mean three in the
no,
whole world
yeah.
that have small tooth?
Yeah. So the greens and like some of the other species are a little better represented,
Mhm.
but still not like a lot, you know?
Oh,
I wish I should
okay.
have looked at the numbers before, but I mean for small tooth sawfish, we're talking about, these 4 that are left in SeaWorld Orlando. Because we did, unfortunately, that female did eventually pass away, the large female.
Really?
Um,
Like right after she gave birth?
Not right after, but probably not quite a year after. And our pathologist actually said that she didn't have a ton of exposure to sawfish necropsies,
Hmm.
but she said based on other large elasmobranch necropsies she's done that our female sawfish was had the most significant signs of advanced age she's ever seen in a large elasmobranch.
And
So
still give birth
yeah,
successfully, at least like
yeah,
now with captive animals, like up until they essentially die, which is really, I mean, that's good for the species if that happens in the wild as well.
yeah. But yeah,
How
really fascinating
interesting.
because, right, I mean, like I said, her exposure to sawfish is limited, but she's done a ton of like sand tigers and other
Mhm.
large elasmos that you see in zoo and aquarium settings. And not unlike humans, there are physiological changes that, like in the vessels around their brain and their heart and in their spine, that will show kind of calcification, mineralization. So, she has some indicators of when a large elasmobranch is getting up there in age, relative to for what is normal for that species. And yeah, and she said she's never seen such significant signs of aging in a large elasmobranch as she
Oh
did
my
in that
goodness.
female. Yeah. But she also said her reproductive tract was pristine. That was beautiful. That was active, that it was like, yeah. So, which also raises a question like, do these animals ever become post
Right.
reproductive? Like, um,
That's
yeah, and
really cool.
yeah. So, and again, sample size of 1, so who
Right.
knows? But
But
um,
still,
yeah, the entire experience, even, when we lost the female, I mean, devastating, heartbreaking for our team. But even in that, we learned some really neat things about these animals. But anyway, on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, coming back to managing these populations for breeding opportunities, it's tricky. So now, we do have this new generation of sawfish at SeaWorld, but there's no other aquarium in the US that holds them right now.
yeah.
So, right, we'd either have to go to Bahamas, which they do have, another generation there, but there are a lot of legal loopholes and stuff. There's a lot of
Yes.
permitting, there's a lot of logistics about trying to move critically endangered animals
Mhm.
between countries. So that's a challenge. But so it is something that we're always looking at in the zoo and aquarium world.
Mhm.
And there have been some moves made. So, ironically, the female green sawfish that is at Georgia Aquarium currently is the female green sawfish that was housed at the Shed Aquarium when I was an intern there 20 years ago.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so she was moved to be housed with a male green sawfish. So that is kind of part of that, SSP type program. But the sawfish SSP and stud book programs really struggle with numbers.
Hmm.
Then the hope is there, the intention is there, the want for that program is there. But you know, because these animals, thankfully so, are not easily collected or acquired from the wild as it should be, it does mean that there's an extremely limited population in human care to attempt those breeding pairings. But Georgia Aquarium does hold a male and female green sawfish, so fingers crossed that maybe they're the next success story for the zoo and aquarium industry, that we get some pups and they'll be the first of their species to produce. But yeah, so
You
there's
have never done that in captivity then?
yeah, nope, no green pups ever. To the best of my knowledge, only the small tooths, only
No.
that event in Orlando and that event in the Bahamas, I believe, are the only two successful reproductive events for any sawfish species anywhere in the
Wow.
world. Yeah. So it's yeah, it's pretty special. It's an up and coming science for
Uh-huh.
sure. But like I said, there's a lot of crossover between what field researchers are learning and doing and what we're learning and doing. And again, that's an industry that we're always trying to do better and make it so our animals are not just surviving but thriving, while they inspire people to hopefully care about those populations that are, you know, still out in nature, and give people good reason to look out for sawfish out in the wild, and to make changes, you know, to fishing practices and things like that, and developing. And um so yeah, it's quite the story.
That is quite the story. I guess I didn't realize, even as someone who studies sawfish, like I didn't realize how few small tooth are in aquariums.
Yeah,
Um, that's that's crazy. I didn't realize that. Especially like Florida has so many, like they have SeaWorld, they have the Florida Aquarium, you have Georgia right there.
yeah.
Small tooth are in Florida. I thought there would be more, but huh.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to their, you know, protection, you can't just
Right.
acquire a small tooth sawfish anymore, which is great. But you know, depending on how this spinning event goes and stuff, I mean, that may be somewhere where we end up seeing a couple more animals in human care long term. I mean, that's not ideal, but
Right.
that's probably one of the only ways I foresee, you know, us having more viable adults
Mhm.
in those settings. Hopefully, I mean, even as someone who loves taking care of sawfish in aquariums, I don't want to see that.
Right.
Like,
Hopefully it's
um,
not. But
yeah, but yeah, I mean, again, you know, it sounds a little silly, but honestly, like the number of hours that I've gotten to spend like side by side with live sawfish, I mean, it's, you know, probably more people have gone to space. Like
right.
it's yeah, you know, it's one of the greatest privileges of my lifetime and career to spend time around these animals, and that's what makes it so easy for me to, you know, want to tell people how cool they are. You know, and I used to tell people that behind the scenes at SeaWorld Orlando all the time too, you know, when we'd be standing at the Shark Tank looking at those small two sawfish, I'd tell them, you know, this is the only place in the United States you are guaranteed a sighting of this animal. And I would explain to them, you know, these animals are so rare that FWC wants to know if you just see one. Like,
Right.
not if you find a dead one, not if you catch one. Like, if you visually see one, it's that we know that little about them that, like,
Mhm.
if you have a sighting, they want to know because we know
Right.
that little.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so just really fascinating animals, and, you know, such a privilege to be around them.
And that's so cool. Like, again, I haven't interviewed anyone who's worked with them like that. Like, I've interviewed researchers that have worked with them. Obviously, I work with museum specimens of them, so never anything live, unfortunately. So it's really cool to see it from that side where you've actually like worked with them, kind of gotten to see like their personality and how they're gentle. Like, that's just so cool because, I obviously like I feel like that. Like I love them as
Yeah.
but then when you get to actually see them live and like get their personality and like see them every day, that's so cool.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, but yeah, that's why I'm here with Sawfish Conservation Society too, because as you can tell, I have no inhibitions when it comes to talking about them.
Yeah,
I could go on and on.
but I mean that makes sense. Like they're such cool animals, and yeah, now that you're involved, so you plan on doing outreach at the Georgia Aquarium or just anywhere that you can in terms of these sawfish?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely on my agenda to have to get the messaging more prominent at Georgia Aquarium, get to have them do a larger International Sawfish Day event for sure. That's an easy one because that's my backyard now.
Right.
But also from being in the zoo and aquarium industry for 20 years, and working at several different facilities, I am very fortunate to have a lot of good relationships and connections that I've built over the years, um, to help drive these events and hopefully ask people to participate more. Um, I am actually right now kind of working with, I've got friends that are out at SeaWorld Abu Dhabi that used to
Oh,
work at SeaWorld Orlando. Yeah, so SeaWorld Abu Dhabi is a new marine park out there,
okay.
um, that is the largest indoor marine park now.
Wow.
Yeah, so they don't house sawfish currently, but there are sawfish encounters documented on the shores of the UAE.
Mhm.
So right now I am actually kind of talking to some of my old colleagues out there, and we're trying to get something rolling, and get them to participate in International Sawfish Day out in, yeah, the United Arab Emirates. So yeah, I'm really hoping to utilize, all these years of relationships and connections for things like that to kind of get these messages out to places where maybe they haven't been before, or maybe more emphasis in areas that maybe prior, made mention. But I've got a couple different old colleagues that work at different facilities down in South Florida that I'm hoping to start poking, that again, not don't necessarily house sawfish, but are in prime sawfish habitat locations and are likely to have patrons that may actually,
Yeah,
encounter
similar.
them while they're out fishing or boating or whatnot. But yeah, so that's hopefully what I'm bringing to the table, aside from like my super nerdy enthusiasm for sawfish in
Mhm.
general. But yeah, as the co-chair of education and being, kind of made, specifically responsible for driving outreach. That's what I'm really hoping I can contribute, is those relationships and kind of sliding into the doors of all these different facilities that people come to learn about, the natural world and things like critically endangered sawfish. So hopefully, that's the next step for me.
Perfect. Well, do you want to, I always ask, like, what's like one thing you would say to someone who wants to get involved with sawfish? Like a student or an undergraduate who wants to go into specifically maybe husbandry, and working with conservation in that way. Like, what is your number one thing you would tell them?
Um, I would say, especially for aquarium husbandry, is get involved in any way you can very early.
Okay.
The aquarium industry is really interesting in the way that sometimes I describe it almost more like a trade than a more academically driven
Mhm.
pursuit. You absolutely need at least a 4-year degree in biology, or some kind of biology based studies.
Okay.
But for us, because a lot of what we do is so driven by visual observation and hands-on, um, to break into that field. A lot of times the leadership wants to see that you have kind of walked the walk. Advanced degrees can be helpful but are not required in our particular field. And many times, when people are looking to hire people, they are actually looking more for the hands-on experience, because it can be, very physical field. Not that, field research absolutely can be too.
Right.
But we spend, our time scuba diving and cleaning and, climbing ladders, and there's a lot of dirty work that people don't realize goes
Yes.
into animal husbandry. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of crazy to say this, but think of like running a farm. If you have a dairy farm, like where does all the animal waste go? Who preps all the food? Who takes all the food out there?
Mhm.
There's this whole aspect of, I mean, I sit and talk about, oh, scuba diving with the sawfish and getting to,
Yeah.
pet my sawfish and whatever. And that's like 5% of it.
Yeah. The rest is
um,
dirty work.
yeah, and I mean, obviously there's can be comparisons made absolutely for academia and field work and stuff. But it's like doing field work 24/7.
But that's
It's
great for people who like don't necessarily want to go to grad school, you know?
yeah.
Like if they don't
Yeah.
want to go that route, there is other routes they can go, and a lot of people don't talk about that. So that's cool.
Yeah.
You get to see, the other side of it is, even if you go and study sawfish for years and years like I have, like I've never really seen like spent that much time with a live sawfish, whereas you get to go
Yeah.
and do that. So you can, if you don't want to go to grad school, you can go into another route. And husbandry seems like a really cool one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the best way to kind of get your foot in the door with that is like those volunteer and
Okay.
internships. Like, get in there, show them that you can do it, build the relationships. And I mean, and you learn so much
Mhm.
too. But yeah, that is always when people ask me like, how did you get this job? And unfortunately, I did it for free for a long time is the real answer.
Right.
So, which is a labor of love. I am certainly not, upset that I did it for free, but that does require sometimes assistance or help from family
Mhm.
members, or it has its own challenges and its own ways. But yeah, kids that are in high school or early college, like the best thing they can do is try to find a zoo or aquarium that'll let them volunteer in
Mhm.
husbandry situations. That's going to be probably one of your most marketable tools after, accomplishing the 4-year degree.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah,
This
of
is really
course. Thank you for having
interesting.
me.
Probably like some of the coolest sawfish stories I've honestly ever heard. So
Oh, well, thank you.
really cool. Well, you don't hear every day sawfish giving birth and
Yeah.
all of that. Like that's so cool. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do it and happy to be on board with Sawfish Conservation Society.